swing that a little easier and hitting Andy. Yeah. Huh? Yeah, there you go. You can reach the spider this time. And of course, it's good to have Holly here.
You can tell the excitement in your voice. Not me. I can imagine you guys be out and about.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. No, we are in Esther chapter 4. Esther chapter 4. So we finished up Esther 3 last week, and we're getting ready to start 4. And so remember, Haman has made his master plan. We ended the chapter with him and the king celebrating by drinking. And then you have the rest of the people are perplexed. They don't know what's going on. They can't figure it out. And so that kind of plays into what we see in verse 1 of chapter 4, because the people were perplexed. I'm sure Mordecai was one of those. And then Mordecai spends time trying to figure out what's going on and why. And so we'll see that in chapter 4. If somebody want to read verse, 1. Let's say, we got to just read 1 through, 5. Start there.
When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes, put on sackcloth with ashes, and went into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many laying sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. And then called Esther for one of the king's chamberlains, who had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was.
All right, so verse 1, when Mordecai, King James, as Caleb read there, said, what did it say? Figured out, verse 1. When Mordecai, not figured out, perceived. The better word there is learned. And that's what the King James, or New King James, uses. Because when you look at the word, it has the idea of to know, to acquire knowledge. And so that's interesting about Mordecai is we end chapter 3 with the people being perplexed. And the idea there was they were confused, they didn't know what was going on. Then we see chapter 4, the first thing Mordecai learned all that had happened. He had gathered the facts. He didn't react immediately. He waited until he had figured out what was going on. He spent time studying the facts and finding the truth. It's important to note because he spent time gathering the facts, understanding what brought about this edict, this proclamation. A lot of times people just react without even knowing all the facts, right? Isn't that the idea of a mob? Isn't that what mobs do? They hear of something. We've read that, and we were reading in Acts chapter 23. The people, they hear about what Paul had done. They didn't gather the facts. They didn't try to understand. They just got mad and made a mob. And that is the opposite of what's going on here. Mordecai spent time making sure he understood. Now, in finding out the facts, and we're going to find out with Mordecai, he probably knew a little bit more than most about what had happened. It doesn't tell us, the text doesn't tell us, but with him understanding the facts, would that have also been maybe the fact that he was the one that started this. Not him, but his actions is the one that started all this. I don't know. Because we learned that Haman, of course, did all of this because of Mordecai and his hatred towards him. And so it could include that, understanding what actions led to this. And it's not saying it's his fault. He did the right thing. But it was because of his standing up to Haman and his idea of wanting to be worshipped is what caused this to happen. And so it doesn't tell us that, but the idea that Word learned all that had happened, he had gathered all the facts and figured out. Once he understood the rest of that verse, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And so his reaction was to put on sackcloth and ashes. Now, how often do we see that? What's it usually applied to? Okay. Yeah, somebody dying. Think about David, and his son was going to die, and he put on sackcloth and ashes and didn't eat. So a lot of times it was mourning. Here's an interesting quote. It says, sackcloth was rough and dark and made of hair, and was normally worn only for mourning in hours of national calamity. The ashes and wailing drew attention to Mordecai's lamentation and emphasized to all who saw them the gravity of his distress. And so what is important about this is a very public thing. He didn't just go put on sackcloth and ashes and go hide in his house or mourn in his house. Where did he go? Yeah, he went right to the middle of town. And as we find out, he went to the center of town, the square, our square uptown here, our big city here. But he went up to the square and mourned and wailed and yelled in his mourning. And that just so happened to be the same place where the gate is at, which I think he had a reason in doing this. But he went up to the gate, and there he mourned. And so he mourned all the way to the gate. Now notice verse 2. It tells us that he went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. Why was that the case? Well, history says that a lot of magistrates or leaders did not like people being in that state around them. And so they would not be allowed into the king's gate in that state. And so he could only go as far as the gate. And I think, more importantly, Mordecai did this for one reason. He was mourning, of course, but why did he go to the front gate? Yeah, exactly. It would get Esther's attention, which it wasn't her attention, it was her servant's attention. We're going to find out. But that's going to get her attention because, as we're going to see, there's not a line of communication between the two. There's no Mordecai coming over and seeing Esther and Esther spending time with him. We don't see that. Matter of fact, what we see from this chapter, she has no clue what's going on in the kingdom at all. So that tells us a little bit about the fact that women that were put into his harem had no clue, no contact with the outside world. And through this, it was her servants that did come to her and tell her about him. And so she didn't know of the proclamation. She didn't know about what was going on. She was kept secluded from the kingdom, really, and all that was going on. And we're going to find out later, she hadn't even been around the king for 30 days.
This lasted a year, right? I mean, she was in the beauty makeup.
Oh, yeah. Initially, yes, when she was in the...
So they actually probably didn't have any contact?
During that time, yeah, either. And so, yeah, once that year ended and she was selected as queen, we don't really know how long it was. So it was a few years before we get to this point. But, yeah, I mean, she could have went a long time without seeing Mordecai. So she's secluded. She's secluded from all that's going on. And so verse 3 tells us that Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Sorry, wrong chapter. I keep looking up here at the top of my page. It says, in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was a great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. And so wherever this proclamation went, of course, what's going to happen? People are going to mourn. There's something interesting difference here. Earlier we saw that with with Mordecai, he put on sackcloth and ashes. But here it says the people lay in ashes, in sackcloth and ashes. And so we see a little difference in some places. Somebody read Job chapter 2 and verse 8.
And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes.
Okay, so in Job, what did Job do? He sat in the ashes. So in a sense, laid in the ashes or sat in them. We see that also in Jeremiah 6 and verse 26. Sometimes they were placed on their head in 2 Samuel 13 and verse 19. And so it's just another way of showing their mourning, and the people did that wherever this proclamation went.
Some say that Job 2:8, he was living in the dump because he lost everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where he lived, in the city dump.
It could be. Yeah, it could be.
It also there, he had painful sores, so he was scraping himself, he had the ashes and stuff on him. That might have been partly from medical.
Mm-hmm. It would have. Yeah, to help his sores. Yep. And so, yeah, if he was in a dump, that's an interesting place to try to deal with your sores. But yeah, So there's different times we see this. We see times where people lay in sackcloth and ashes because they're repentant heart, the things they had done. We see the Israelites do that when they were trying to show God their repentance, things like that. And so it's just a little different way, but it's just interesting the difference here. Mordecai had put on, so he had ashes on him as he was going throughout the city. In other places, they just lay in these ashes with sackcloth and showing their mourning, the same thing. And so verse 4. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came, told her the queen was deeply distressed. So what does she do? Well, she sends garments. She sends garments to Mordecai. She's trying to figure out what is going on. And so, she's trying to make him better, and by giving him different clothes to wear. She doesn't know why he's mourning. Could be a family thing. Could be something she doesn't know, because of course she's secluded from the kingdom, and so we don't know. But what's interesting is that these eunuchs, these maids and eunuchs, they knew who Mordecai was, and they knew that if there was something wrong with Mordecai, they should go tell Esther. So, it kind of tells us that either they knew of their close relationship and had already been helping with that communication line, or it was that she gave him command. If you see Mordecai, try to know how he's doing and things like that. Keep an eye on him and keep her informed. But she was very grieved because when she hears about this, she was deeply distressed, not knowing what's going on. So she has clothes taken to him. He would not accept them. We think about it, by changing his garments, he would be able to then do what? Yeah, in a sense, able to come into the king's court or the king's gate. We don't have an indication of where we see this, the communication between the both of them. But here, she wants him to be able to come in the king's gate, but he can't because he refuses. And so verse 5, then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs whom he appointed, and attended her. And she gave him a command concerning Mordecai to learn what and why this was. She wanted to know why. So then verse 6, so Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay in the king's treasury to destroy the Jews. Do you think that was a very well-known thing about what Haman was going to pay? No. So it's interesting that Mordecai knew more information than really the common person that was getting this proclamation. And not only that, we're going to see he has a copy of it. So it's interesting because did Haman want to make sure he had a copy to know what was going to happen to him? Did he just copy it himself? It could be. But he knew every detail, in a sense. It seems like he knows all the details of what was going on. And he's very distressed by what is going to happen. And so, like I said, he has a copy of the proclamation. And so,
It looks like somebody gave it to him, though. It says, which was given at Shushan.
Well, it's the proclamation that was given at Shushan, which was talked about at the end of chapter 3. So, he had a copy of it, but he had given that copy to this servant, this eunuch, to then take to Esther for her to read. So I don't know if he made a copy himself or he was handed a personal copy by one of Haman's servants. Say, hey, this is what's going to happen to you. I want you to make sure you know this.
Yeah, but they went throughout the land. And so, I mean, I hate to just say assume, but there was a message that was hung
Everywhere.
given. Flyers, what we call it.
Yep. Yeah. And so he knew he had a copy. He brought it to her for her to be able to read. And so then that brings us to verse 8. He gave a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication. Turn my page. To him and plead before him for her people. Interesting. What has something she's been hiding ever since she picked up that she was a Jew? What has Mordecai been telling her? To hide it. To not say anything. Told her twice. Do not say who you are, who your people are. Now that it's the point where the Jews are going to die, he doesn't say, I hope you do this. He says, he commands her. Notice that. He says that he might command her to go into the king and make supplication to him and plead for him and for her people, before her people. He's saying the gloves are off. It's time to let him know who you are. And so Mordecai informs the servant. Mordecai tells Esther to go before the king. The word supplication there means to ask, beg, beseech, desire. All of those things, procure. He is saying, go before the king and beg for your people's life. And pray that, in a sense, pray that he will change his mind. Which is that something that the Medes and Persians do? Do they change the law? No. So interesting.
I never did speak to her directly. They went back and forth between that.
The eunuch, yeah, Hacketh or whatever. No, they never did.
They must trust him, huh?
Mm-hmm. Must have. Now later on, they're going to be able to, once Mordecai has been blessed and put into a position of authority. But at this point, no. We don't see that interaction between her and him at all. It's done through a messenger. And so, yeah, someone that she trusted, of course, which is good. But it is going to mean more. You think about this. She's going to talk about who she is. She's going to tell him who she is. Do you think it's going to mean more to the king to know that these people are her people and that they're not just some people she cares about? And that's her, really. You would hope that he would. You'd hope he would say, you know what? Yeah, I don't really want to do this to you. You're my queen. And of course, as we saw with chapter 2, he really loved her. It says he loved her. Not only did he love her for her looks, but he loved her for who she was, her character. And so, you would think that he would definitely not want that to happen to her. And so, using that information at this point is important. And so, think about it. Esther's love is now going to be put to test. Her love for what? For God, the plan. Ultimately, that's the point. And so she's going to be put to the test here. And, it's a pretty dangerous test that she's going to go under. And so that brings us to verse 9. And so somebody want to read, I know I've read a little bit, but let's read 9 through the end of the chapter. We'll probably get to the end of the chapter tonight.
And Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again Esther spake unto Hathach and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded it to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return to Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
All right, so Esther, she spoke to this messenger, this eunuch. What did you say, Debbie?
I said Hathach.
Hathach. That's probably right. Hathach. And gave him a command for Mordecai. And so all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman. So we go into what she states there. She says, if anyone goes in front of the king who is not invited, they're killed. Unless the king points a scepter to them that they may live. Now you think about this. David Rogers, he did a kind of a commentary on Esther. He said this, I thought it was interesting. He says, like many potentates, Ahasuerus took firm precautions against assassination. His bodyguards probably had orders to kill immediately anyone who entered the throne room unbidden, lest the king be injured. Keel points out that Esther could have announced herself before entering and thus not jeopardize her life. To do this required that she'd state her business, though, and this would have put Haman on guard. It's an interesting thought. So, a lot of times we read this and we go, well, isn't that crazy to think that if someone came uninvited to the king that they would just be killed? What about today with our president? If someone decided that they wanted, they're not going to get killed, but, they might. If someone decided that they wanted to go uninvited into the White House or uninvited into the Oval Office, what's going to happen to them? Probably nothing.
As long as they thumb from the roof.
Depends on who it is, right? Yeah. Make sure there's a 1% grade slope on that roof. No.
Slopiness was the word.
If
Got into the White House,
he did.
but he talked to guard and let him in.
Ah.
Who's that?
Justin.
Of course he talked to a guard. He did his way.
He went in the side door.
That's cool. Well, you think about it, no one uninvited is going to be able to make it close to the president. So it's not a crazy thing to think about. And then not only that, the Keel, which is another commentator, he pointed out that Esther could have entered without endangering her life if she had stated who she was and what her point of going was. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, because I think it takes away from the danger of what she was going to do. But if she had stated, hey, I'm here because of what Haman had did, her whole plot of being able to do what she needed to do was not going to work. So, I mean, it's an interesting thought, but I think it really just more the fact that the danger of her, because she's focused on that. She focuses on that danger of going before the king unannounced and losing her life. And it didn't matter if she was his queen, which is crazy. Now, is the first lady going to get the same treatment if she tried to get? No, she's going to be able to do that, I would think.
she was just stating the facts and waiting for his advice.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, there is some danger with what she's going to do, because she states, again, at the end of that verse 11, she says, yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. She may be wondering, why has he not asked to see me in 30 days? Could be that he's angry with me. She has to think about, what about the previous queen and what happened with her? There's a lot of things that could be going through her mind, but she has stated here that it seems like she's worried. Seems like she's afraid of what could happen to her if she goes in. She knows the law, and in a sense, she's going to try to break the law by going and trying to reach him. And so think about this. So Esther gives these facts. Was she trying to make excuses? I don't think so. I think she was stating the facts, but was she afraid?
I think she was just letting Mordecai know her situation.
Mm-hmm. I think she's saying, you got to think about my side of it, what's going on here. If I go in front of him, I could lose my life. It's not allowed.
This is just conversation. They're just reasoning with one another.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
It is. Is it wrong for her to hesitate and think about this instead of just going, you know what, I'm going to do it? Is it wrong for her to hesitate?
Mordecai's been thinking about it for a while.
Yeah. Do we have other examples of people who hesitated in a sense before they did what God told them to do? Well, and that's and God telling them. But here's Mordecai telling Esther. But how many times have we seen people in the scriptures hesitate, maybe give excuses? One of the best examples is who? Jonah. Yeah, about Jonah. Yeah, Moses. Moses gave 4 excuses, and the 4th one, God said, "All right, I'm tired of this. You're gonna do this, and I'm gonna have Aaron help you." And so, Moses did it, and he ended up doing a lot of great things for God.
Well, even Jesus had to seek reassurance before he went to the cross.
Yeah, I did. So I don't think it was wrong for her to hesitate here. I don't think it was wrong for her to think through this of what could happen to her, the consequences of doing this. Should she do it? Should she not? It's the same thing any of us do. When we're faced with a dilemma, faced with what we need to do, we think about it. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, Abraham, God came to Abraham and told him what he was about to do. There's a reason. Abraham wouldn't have felt that God was doing something that was just until they had a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Abraham realized it's worse than I thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to think through things. And that's exactly what Esther's doing here. She's thinking through it, and she's wanting Mordecai, because they can't talk face to face. The message has got to go to Mordecai, but to think about her side of it and what's going on. And so then verse 13, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther, "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews." Another way of saying that is, do you think about this? Really think about this. Do you think you're going to be fine as a Jew in the king's palace?
I think about this conversation. You might die now, you will die later. Your choice.
Yeah, exactly. Because once he finds out, the law is Jews are supposed to die. And it's going to happen. And so he's thinking, think about this. Your life is also in the balance here. You could die going in front of the king. You could die on the 13th of the third month, whatever month it was, month of Adar. And so make the choice. And so then he tells her, verse 14, which is, one of the most famous verses in talking about Esther, or verse 13. 14, it says, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" You think about what Mordecai says there. He says, you can be silent. He says, you can be silent. You can choose not to do this. He's not saying God, but that's what he's talking about. God's going to protect his people one way or another.
It just shows his faith that God's going to provide a means, whether it's her or not.
Yeah.
If you choose to say no, God still will provide a way. He believed that.
Yeah. And it may not be in the palace here. It may not be in Shushan. It might be in Jerusalem or another place that God preserves his people for the purpose.
Well, I
But
think he's looking at it going, we've probably heard somebody say that, how do you know that God hasn't prepared you for this situation?
Mhm.
That can be a lesson that we can draw from this is, no matter what we've gone through, when we become a Christian, whatever experiences we've had in life,